My wife was moaning another man's name while I was downstairs cooking dinner for her. I didn't barge in. I didn't shout. I just stirred the soup quietly, letting the smell of betrayal blend with the aroma of beef broth. She probably thought I couldn't hear it through the walls. The worst part? That wasn't even the first time. Last week, Madison told me she needed space, said she'd be out late with friends. She came back at 2 a.m. with lipstick smudged in perfume. I didn't buy. The week before that, she was suddenly allergic to my touch, said my hands felt cold, said my silence was exhausting. But today was different. Today, I heard a name. Andrew. She whispered it like a secret prayer, again and again, soft, breathless, like he was oxygen. I stood in the kitchen with a ladle in my hand, wondering what kind of man makes a woman forget the one who spent 10 years building a life with her. Then I heard her laugh. That laugh she hadn't shared with me in months. I set the ladle down, wiped my hands on the towel, and walked outside to the garden. David Jr. was out there, headphones on, doing his homework. I sat beside him. He looked up. Something wrong? No, I said. Just needed air. I didn't tell him his mother was cheating, didn't tell him she had a man in our bed, but when he leaned his head on my shoulder and said, "I'm glad you're still here, Dad," I realized something. I could lose a wife. I couldn't lose my son. Inside the house, Madison's voice rose in pleasure. I reached for my phone, opened the security app, hit record. If she wanted to destroy our family, fine. But I'd make sure she'd never twist the story. Let her. Keep Andrew. She'd soon learn that the man she cheated on wasn't just her husband. He was also the man Andrew would one day call boss. My name is David Summers. I'm 38 years old, a father, and until recently a husband. I met Madison when I was 24. She was the kind of woman who made you forget what you were doing mid-sentence. Soft voice, sharp eyes, confident stride. She carried herself like she already belonged to the future, and somehow I believed it was my job to build it for her. Back then, I had just opened my second retail branch. It wasn't much, just discount electronics and appliances, but I had a plan. Madison walked in looking for a coffee maker. She walked out with my heart. It sounds dramatic now, but when she smiled at me and said, "You really think this cheap little thing will last a year?" I grinned and said, "You'll come back for a better one. People always come back." She did. We dated for a year, moved in together after 2, married in the 3rd. She stood beside me when I made my first million, held my hand through expansion meetings, ran social media for my stores. For a while, we were a team. Then David Jr. was born. Everything changed. Not overnight, not sharply, but gradually. First, it was the sleep. Madison said she was too tired to help at night. Then, it was the distance. She needed me time to stay sane. Then, the complaints, my long hours, my missed dinners, my lack of romantic gestures. I tried to make it better. Hired a live-in nanny so she could rest. Took weekend trips. Bought her flowers on random Thursdays. But the cracks were there. She stopped kissing me goodnight. She stopped asking about my day. She started going to the gym twice a day, started locking her phone, started staying out late. I blamed myself. Maybe I got too busy. Maybe I forgot how to be a husband while learning how to be a provider, but deep down I knew. She was pulling away not because I changed, but because I didn't. Because I stayed grounded while she wanted to fly. Still, I held on. Not for her, but for David Jr. He's 13 now. Quiet, observant, smarter than I ever was. He notices things. He always has. One night, he came into the kitchen while I was washing dishes. "Dad," he said, "is Mom in love with someone else?" I dropped. "A plate. It didn't break, just spun noisily in the sink." "Why would you ask that?" I said without turning. He shrugged. "She's always texting someone. She doesn't laugh with you like she laughs at her phone." I dried my hands and faced him. "Would you be okay if she was?" He thought about it, then said, "I'd be okay, as long as you don't leave too." That's when I knew. Madison may have been the woman I loved, but she was no longer the woman who loved me, and I couldn't hold on to something that had already let go. The next day, I asked her directly, "Are you seeing someone?" She stared at me for a long time, then said, "What would you do if I was?" I smiled gently. "I'd ask if you want to make it official." Madison didn't answer. She just walked away. But that night, she stayed out again, and the next morning, she said it. "Let's get a divorce." No tears, no yelling, just a plain, cold sentence, like she was canceling a subscription. I agreed. It shocked her, how easily I let her go. But what was I supposed to do? Beg a woman who didn't even flinch when I agreed to her leaving? Madison was once the love of my life. Now she was just a woman with a different address and someone else's name on her lips. The only thing I cared about now was David Jr. He still had his whole future ahead of him, and I didn't want him growing up learning that men should tolerate disrespect for the sake of peace. That's why I didn't argue over property. I let Madison take the house, the SUV, and even some investments I had set aside. She called me stupid. I just said, better stupid than bitter. She didn't know that I had quietly stepped back from the business, not because I failed, but because I saw something bigger on the horizon. And when Andrew, the man she cheated with, called me boss without knowing who I was, the irony hit like a silent slap across her face. I saw the way her eyes widened, saw the way her hand trembled. She realized in that moment that the man she thought was nothing was actually everything she wanted Andrew to become. But it was too late. Because once you choose cheap thrills over commitment, you don't get a second shot. The phone call came a week after Madison had left. I had been working late into the evening, trying to get the store's financials back on track. I didn't want to think about her, but I couldn't help it. Every now and then, the memory of her laugh, her smile, and the way her eyes had looked when she asked for the divorce would seep through my focus, making the work in front of me blur. It was past midnight when the phone rang. At first, I thought it was a client, but then I saw the name flash across the screen. Madison. I hesitated. What did she want now? I was getting used to the silence between us, getting used to the lack of explanations. And yet, part of me still hoped that she'd call to apologize, to admit she was wrong. I almost wanted to believe she was just too proud to admit her mistake, but I knew better. I answered. "David," she said, her voice soft but strained, as though she had been holding something back for a long time. "Can you meet me tomorrow? I need to talk." "Talk about what?" I asked, my voice sharp, despite myself. I knew what I was asking, knew it, but I wanted to hear it from her. "I don't know. I just need to explain some things." Her words hung in the air, leaving me with nothing but the weight of my own confusion. It was the first time since the divorce had started that I felt something crack inside me. The next day, I met her at a cafe, one we used to visit when we first started dating. It was small, tucked away on the corner of a busy street, with large windows that looked out over the city. The same spot where we first spoke of our dreams. When she arrived, she looked different, tired. Her once glowing skin had a dull pallor, and the bright confidence she once carried had been replaced by an uncertain hesitation. We didn't speak at first. I simply stared at her, waiting for her to begin. I've been thinking a lot about everything, David," she began, looking down at her coffee cup. "I've been selfish, I know. I thought I wanted freedom, but I think I've just been running away from myself, and from you." I wanted to say something, wanted to tell her how much she had hurt me, how much it hurt to know that the woman I trusted more than anyone else had betrayed me in ways I couldn't begin to understand. But I didn't. Instead, I just nodded, waiting. "And Andrew," she said, looking at me, I don't know what I was thinking. It was a mistake. A horrible, terrible mistake. My heart tightened in my chest. The mention of his name sent a rush of heat to my face. "And you want me to just forgive you?" I asked, the words tasting bitter as I said them. "After everything? After what you did to us? You think you can come back and fix things like nothing happened?" She recoiled at my words, her face flushing with shame. No, I don't expect that. I wanted to explain, to make things right." I leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath. She wanted to make things right. It was almost laughable, the idea of returning to the way things had been. "Madison," I began, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "You made a choice. You chose Andrew, and you made it clear you didn't care about our marriage anymore. And now you want to come back and play the victim? The one who's sorry? You can't just tear someone apart and then expect them to pick up the pieces like nothing happened." She looked like she was about to cry, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, but I didn't feel sympathy. The wound she had caused me was still raw, still aching, and I wasn't ready to let her heal it for me. She wiped her eyes, her voice shaking. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was confused, and when I found Andrew, it felt like I wasn't invisible anymore. Like I wasn't just the wife who took care of everything, who kept the house clean and the family together while you built your empire. Her words stung. But what hurt more was that I didn't know how to respond. Had she really been that unhappy? I had tried so hard to make everything work. The late nights, the weekends I sacrificed, the vacations I paid for, but none of it had been enough. "You think that's what I wanted?" I asked, my voice softening despite myself. "Do you think I built this life so that I could just ignore you? That I didn't notice how distant you became?" I knew, Madison. I always knew something was wrong, but I kept pushing because I thought we could fix it together. But I was just fooling myself, wasn't I? She didn't answer. Instead, she took a sip of her coffee, avoiding my gaze. "You were so focused on everything else," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You didn't notice what I needed. I wanted to be seen, David. I wanted to be more than just your wife." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of truth. I realized then that we hadn't just grown apart. We had been speaking different languages for years. What she needed, I couldn't give. And what I needed, she couldn't see. I leaned forward, my elbows on the table. "Madison, you were never just my wife. You were the mother of my son. You were my partner, my best friend. But somewhere along the way, I guess I lost you. And I wish I could say it was all your fault, but I know I wasn't perfect either. But what happened after we started drifting apart? I can't just forget that." She nodded slowly, her gaze soft but pained. "I know. And I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve your forgiveness." The silence between us stretched long, thick, and suffocating. I wasn't ready to forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But in that moment, I realized that the anger I had felt for so long was no longer the driving force in my life. The betrayal, the disappointment, it was all still there, but I was moving forward. And I had to let go, no matter how much it hurt. Finally, she spoke again, this time with a quiet but firm resolve. "I'm leaving. I can't come back, David. Not to you, and not to this life. But I want to make things easier for you. For David Jr." It wasn't the resolution I had been hoping for, but it was a resolution nonetheless. The truth was out. And now it was time to begin the process of healing, even if it meant doing it alone. The nights after that conversation weren't quiet anymore. They were loud in a different way. Not from outside noise or someone laughing in the next room, but from within. Thoughts, regrets, half-finished sentences I wanted to say to Madison. The sound of my son's soft breathing in the next room was the only thing that reminded me I still had something, someone worth holding on to. I told myself over and over that I was fine, that I was the one who stayed calm, that I was the one who didn't cheat, that I was the one who tried. But none of that stopped the ache in my chest when I woke up alone, or when I made breakfast, and realized there was one less mug to set out. I hated that I still checked my phone sometimes, half expecting to see her name again. I hated that my first instinct was to tell her about little things. A funny ad I saw, David Jr. cracking a sarcastic joke, or the new logo design I was proud of. But there was no one on the other end anymore. I kept busy, cleaned the house, cooked better meals. Took David to the library, the arcade, the basketball court. But every now and then, something would hit me hard. A photo in the drawer, an old receipt from our favorite restaurant, her handwriting on a note I never threw away. And I'd find myself standing in the hallway like a statue, frozen in time, wondering if it was me who failed, or just the dream we tried to build. People say betrayal is just a moment, a single action. They're wrong. It echoes. It follows you, even when the person who hurt you is gone. I could still hear Madison's laughter in the house sometimes. Not the mocking one from recent months, but the warm one from years ago when we used to dance barefoot in the living room after putting our son to sleep. That memory stung the most, because it reminded me we had something once, something real, and yet something inside me had shifted too. I wasn't just mourning what I lost. I was starting to question what I'd let myself become. Somewhere between building my company and saving my marriage, I'd stopped living for myself. Everything had become about survival. Keeping things together. Not making a scene, making enough, giving enough, being enough. But now, with no one left to perform for, I was face to face with someone I hadn't met in years. Myself. David Jr. noticed. He always did. One night as we ate dinner, just the two of us, he put his chopsticks down and looked at me quietly. "Dad," he said, "you don't have to pretend in front of me." I blinked. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "You act like you're okay. Like you're not hurt. But it's okay to be sad. I'd be sad too if Mom chose someone else." It took everything in me not to let the tears rise. Not because he said it, but because he understood it. I leaned forward and whispered, "I'm not pretending for me. I'm doing it for you." He shook his head. "I don't need that. I just need you to be real." And that broke something in me. I nodded, quietly. We didn't say anything else for a while, but he stood up, walked over to my side of the table, and hugged me. And I held on to him longer than I meant to. After that night, the silence started to change. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. I still missed things. Our family dinners, her humming in the kitchen, even the little arguments. But slowly I stopped hoping she'd come back. I stopped imagining how things could have gone. I started focusing on how things will go, but even as I tried to move forward, the unease didn't vanish completely. I started getting weird phone calls, unfamiliar numbers, no one on the other line. One day, I stepped outside to take out the trash and noticed a car parked across the street with tinted windows. The engine was off, but the driver never got out. I stared at it for a full minute before it pulled away slowly, like whoever was inside didn't want to be seen. I started double-checking the locks at night, kept the lights on in the hallway. Something felt off. Then came the message. It was slipped under my door. No name, no return address. Just one line written in uneven handwriting. "You think this is over?" I stared at it for a long time. I didn't tell David Jr. about it, didn't want to scare him. But my instincts went cold. Andrew. It had to be him. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe he finally realized who I was. Or maybe he saw Madison looking at me in a way that made him nervous. Either way, I knew men like him. Arrogant when they think they've won. Dangerous when they start to lose. I couldn't afford to let my guard down. I had a son to protect, a business to grow, a life to reclaim. The betrayal was no longer a wound. It was becoming a threat. 2 days later, I received a letter from the city court. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe a traffic citation or something related to property paperwork. But as I opened the envelope, my heart dropped. It was a formal notice, a restraining order request, filed by Andrew. I read it again just to be sure. He claimed I had been harassing him, that I had threatened him and was trying to ruin his business. that I had shown up at his office uninvited and made veiled threats about destroying his life. I laughed out loud in disbelief, a dry, bitter sound that echoed in my empty kitchen. I hadn't even spoken to him since that day in the driveway when he called me boss without realizing who I was. I hadn't visited his office, hadn't made any threats, hadn't so much as mentioned his name in public. And now he was trying to paint me as the villain? David Jr. came downstairs when he heard me laugh. "What's wrong?" he asked, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. "Nothing important, son. Just someone trying to write fiction." He stared at me. "It's him, isn't it? Andrew." I didn't answer, but I didn't have to. He walked over to me, his expression calm but serious. "Why don't you fight back?" I gave him a tired look. "What good would that do? Let him squirm. The truth always crawls back to the surface." But even as I said it, I knew this wasn't something I could ignore. That night, I got a message from Victor, a screenshot of a post in a local business forum. Andrew was accusing me publicly now, claiming that I was leveraging old connections to sabotage his clients, saying I was spreading false rumors, threatening legal action if I didn't back off. I felt something in me snap. This man had stolen my wife, now he wanted to ruin my name. I had worked for years to build my reputation. I had eaten dirt, sacrificed sleep, missed birthdays, gone through bankruptcy and betrayal, and now he wanted to bury me because he was insecure? I opened my laptop and pulled up everything I had on him. Madison's phone records. The chat logs David Jr. had once copied before she wiped her old phone. The screenshots of payments from Madison's account to Andrew's company months before. The divorce. The emails she had forwarded to me, thinking she was proving a point about me neglecting her, but really showing how long their affair had been going. I had never intended to use them. I thought, foolishly, that walking away was the better revenge. But Andrew had brought the war to me. I handed everything over to my lawyer that week. We filed a defamation counterclaim. We filed to freeze the assets of the joint account Madison had used to funnel money into Andrew's business. And most importantly, I filed for sole custody of David Jr. No more shared holidays. No more awkward weekends. No more chances for Madison to waltz in and out of his life when it suited her. When Madison was served, she showed up at my door 3 hours later. Not yelling, not crying, just pale. "You're going too far," she said quietly. I stared at her, arms crossed. "You let your lover call me a threat. You let him lie about me publicly. And now I'm going too far?" She looked like she wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. "Madison," I said calmly, "you made your choices. You chose Andrew, but you don't get to choose how I react anymore. That part's over." Her eyes watered, but I didn't feel pity, only clarity. This wasn't about revenge, it was about boundaries. Andrew wanted to drag me into the mud. Madison wanted me to stay still and keep taking the blows. But I was done standing still. The day of the hearing came with thick gray skies and a strange stillness in the air, like the city itself was holding its breath. I wore a simple charcoal suit. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. I wasn't there to perform. I was there to end it. Outside the courthouse, a few reporters lingered, drawn in by the online spectacle Andrew had created. Headlines about a business feud, a love triangle, a custody battle. Everyone wanted a bite of drama, but none of them knew what it felt like to sit in silence at midnight, wondering how a decade of your life could be twisted into someone else's headline. David Jr. was at school. I didn't want him involved in this part. He had seen enough already. I saw Madison before I stepped in. She stood by a pillar, arms wrapped around herself despite the warm air. Her eyes met mine for a second. No makeup, no heels, just Madison as she used to be. But I didn't feel anything. No hatred. No longing. Just finality. Andrew was inside already. He wore a smug smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He shook hands with his lawyer like he had already won, like this was some formality before we faded out of his way. When the judge entered and everyone stood, my heart was oddly calm. I had imagined this moment 100 times, every version of it. The version where I exploded in anger. The one where I gave a speech so perfect, it left the courtroom silent. The one where Madison broke down crying and begged to fix it all. But this wasn't any of those fantasies. It was real. And real things don't play out like movies. They're slower, more painful, quietly brutal. Andrew's lawyer went first, painting a portrait of me as a manipulative, vengeful ex-husband with too much power and too many connections. He mentioned emotional instability, control tendencies, and even implied I was using David Jr. as a pawn to hurt Madison. Madison didn't say a word. She just sat there, head bowed. Then it was my lawyer's turn. He spoke softly, methodically. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to win with emotion. He laid out dates, transfers, screenshots, emails, all of it. And then he handed the judge a USB drive. It contained surveillance audio, the night Madison had brought Andrew to the house while I was home, while David Jr. was upstairs doing his homework. The judge listened with earbuds, nodding slowly. I didn't look at Madison while it played. I didn't look at Andrew. I looked at the wall behind them, blank and pale, like the years I spent trying to save that marriage. My lawyer spoke again, this time about David Jr., his performance in school. His medical history, his testimony, recorded privately with a counselor. He has expressed a clear and consistent desire to remain with his father, my lawyer said. He also stated that he does not feel emotionally safe in his mother's home, given her unpredictable behavior and her boyfriend's volatility. The judge took notes, asked a few brief questions, then announced a 10-minute recess. As we exited the courtroom, Andrew brushed past me. "You're still the same pathetic man, David," he muttered under his breath. "Hiding behind lawyers and paperwork. You think this wins?" I turned and looked him directly in the eye. "I don't have to win, Andrew. I just have to watch you lose." He tried to scoff, but his jaw tightened instead. Outside in the hallway, Madison finally spoke. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. I studied her for a long second. "You mean fighting for my son? Or defending my name?" Her lips trembled. "All of it. Why didn't you just let me go?" I almost laughed. "I did let you go, Madison. But letting you go doesn't mean I let go of my dignity. Or my child. You walked out the door. You don't get to decide how I live after that." She blinked fast, as if fighting back tears. But I didn't care anymore. I didn't need her pain to validate mine. "You let him speak for you," I continued. "Let him turn your life into his business tool. And when it started to collapse, you came back thinking I'd be too broken to fight. That I'd just take it." I leaned in slightly. "You underestimated me. Again." She looked down. "I didn't want it to be like this." "Neither did I said. "But you chose it." Back in the courtroom, the judge returned. He was calm, precise. His decision came without emotion. Sole custody of the minor, David Summers. Visitation at the discretion of the father. The defamation countersuit will proceed to mediation. All financial transfers made prior to divorce under Madison's name, including support to Andrew Blackwell's business, will be reviewed under breach of fiduciary duty due to concealed spousal assets. Madison's breath caught. Andrew swore under his breath. It was over. When we stepped out of the building, the reporters circled. I walked past them without saying a word. Let the story write itself. Let them guess. I didn't owe the world an explanation. What I did owe was a pickup. David Jr. was waiting outside school, earbuds in, backpack slung over one shoulder. He saw me and ran over. "Well?" he asked. I ruffled his hair. "You're stuck with me now." He grinned. "Good. Mom's cooking was trash anyway." We laughed, not because it was funny, but because we could. Because after all the silence, all the fear, all the pretending, we could finally breathe again. That night, he sat across from me at dinner and said, "You know, I never really worried." "About what?" "About you. About us." He tapped his chopsticks thoughtfully. "You've always looked sad. But even when you were sad, you were still the strongest person I knew." I didn't reply. I just let that sit with me. Because for all the losses, for all the pain, this moment, right here, was victory. Not the courtroom win, not the frozen assets or the headlines, just this. My son, safe, at peace, still joking like nothing in the world could shake him, because I held the line, because I didn't break, because I chose dignity when they gave me chaos. And I realized something else. I wasn't the man who lost his wife. I was the man who found his worth. 2 months passed, 2 quiet, steady months, no drama, no threats, no shadows in the rearview mirror. Andrew vanished from the business forums after the hearing. His company, already shaky from poor investments, took a nosedive after the partnership freeze and reputation fallout. One by one, his backers pulled out. His social media accounts went silent. His official company site redirected to a 404 page. I didn't lift a finger. I didn't need to, because the truth does what revenge never could. It finishes the job without leaving fingerprints. Madison disappeared from public view, too. No contact, no emails, no requests to see David Jr. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she moved in with her sister across the city. Some said she was depressed. Some said she was expecting again. I didn't care to find out. She had become a side note in the story of my life. I was done looking over my shoulder. My business, on the other hand, exploded. After the courts, publicity and the exposure of Andrew's false accusations, customers flooded back to me, loyal and new alike. Orders tripled. Influencers started reviewing our service. Victor handled operations, but I made the strategic decisions. I stayed in the background, quiet, steady, just the way I liked it. One morning, I was sipping coffee at my desk when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. A deep, tired voice rasped through the line. "David Summers, this is Andrew." I didn't say anything. He continued. Slower now. "You win." I leaned back in my chair. "I wasn't playing." Silence. "Then," he muttered, "everything's gone. They shut down my main warehouse. Investors sued. One of my employees leaked internal records. I don't know how you pulled it off, but I cut him off." "I didn't pull anything off, Andrew. You built your empire on lies." I just stood, still, and let gravity do the rest. He breathed heavily, the sound of a man who had aged 10 years in 2 months. "She's pregnant, you know." I stared out the window. The sun was rising. The streets were alive with noise and movement and light. "And you think I care?" He sighed. "I just thought you should know. She's blaming me for everything." I finally smiled, just a little. That's what happens when people who cheat their way through life run out of people to blame. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "No." I hung up. That was the last time I ever heard his voice. A week later, Madison showed up uninvited. She didn't knock. She waited in the lobby of the building and asked the receptionist to let her speak to me, just once. I went down. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wanted to see her face one last time, to look into the eyes of the woman who tore me in half and still thought she had a say in how I healed. She was thinner, more tired, but she still wore the same shade of lipstick she used to put on before our anniversary dinners. "David," she started, "I'm not here to ask for anything." I waited. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Not because I lost. Not because things turned out the way they did. But because I see now what I never saw then." I didn't reply. I just kept looking at her, letting the silence do what words couldn't. You were always there, through everything. You never left. Even when I pushed you so far, you stayed. I tilted my head slightly. "And you thought that made me weak?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I was wrong." I nodded. "Yes, you were." She hesitated. "David Jr., is he doing okay?" "He's doing better than okay," I said. Top of his class, training for the school debate team, learning guitar, smiles more now. She looked down, trying to hide her face. I wish I could talk to him, just once. I paused. He's old enough to make that choice himself. I turned to leave. She called after me, voice cracking. Do you still hate me? I stopped. Without turning around, I said no. I don't hate you. Because hating you would mean you still take up space in my heart. You don't. You lost that, right the day you chose someone else and still expected me to carry your burdens. She cried then, softly, the way someone cries when they realize they're not the victim in their own tragedy. I walked away. Back upstairs, I found David Jr. on the couch, sketching something in his notebook. Was that her? He asked. Yeah, he didn't look up. Did she cry? I smiled. A little. He nodded. Good. A beat passed. Then he looked up at me. Hey, Dad. Yeah? Can we go somewhere this weekend? Just the two of us. No. Phones, no work. Where do you want to go? He grinned. Anywhere, just not backwards. I laughed. You're getting too wise for your age. He shrugged. You're catching up. We went to a small mountain town that weekend, rented a cabin, cooked our own meals, built a fire, talked about everything. Life, love, disappointment, hope. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Not because I had avenged myself, but because I had rebuilt myself. They say revenge is best served cold. I disagree. The best revenge is success so warm, so quiet, so blindingly peaceful. Your enemies choke on the silence. I didn't just get my life back. I got something better. Freedom. Clarity. A son who watched it all and learned how a man rises when everything tries to drag him down. I wasn't just David Summers, the betrayed husband anymore. I was David Summers, the man who refused to be ruined. And for the first time in years, that was more than enough.